Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So I'm looking for a little input from you in terms of what we should consider exploring on the podcast as topics once the Ahsoka series is done. I have some thoughts about things and would love to hear your feedback and your opinions and options as well. So this podcast is largely about Star Wars storytelling, and so in thinking about that, I naturally am thinking about all the storytelling things that we have yet to talk about here on the podcast. And I thought about it in terms of the 12 categories that we talk about for Star Wars storytelling in all of our monthly previews. So as far as movies go, really the only movie that is relevant to talk about this year is Return of the Jedi, because it's the 40th anniversary, and I think I will continue my series of looks at it. I've only done a couple of them, but hey, we're gonna have a lot of time once the Ahsoka series is done. As far as live action series go, well, we are talking about the Ahsoka series and we'll continue to, and unless we get Skeleton Crew or the Acolyte on deck, then yeah, there's not going to be much new of live action for us to talk about, so there's that. On the animation front, kind of the same thing. However, I never did all of the briefings for the Clone Wars episodes. I stopped around season 3 and never really made it through season 6, as I recall. And there's a part of Star Wars Rebels that I haven't done also, so that's something that we could explore, and the kind of OCD part of me wants to do that to just, complete everything. But that's really kind of more about me. As far as short stories go, well, we only ever looked at a few of the short stories in the original From a Certain Point of View, the Star Wars one. I'm pretty sure we did all the Empire Strikes Back ones, and we've yet to talk about the individual stories in Return of the Jedi from that volume that just came out a few days ago. We've already talked about all of the audio originals on the podcast, so I don't think there's a heck of a lot for us to talk about there. Streaming series, we've talked about everything except Light and Magic, basically. That's the 6-episode docu-series about industrial light and magic. On the video game front, we have not talked at all about the story modes for Star Wars Squadrons or Jedi Fallen Order, yeah, that far back, or Jedi Survivor, of course. And in virtual reality, we haven't talked about story stuff in either Vader Immortal 2 or 3. We did the first one, if I'm not terribly mistaken, and we haven't talked about Tales from the Galaxy's Edge, either of the releases of that. There's nothing really to talk about on the merchandise front. On the live events front, unless we get some sort of published record of what the Galactic Star Cruiser experience was like and what the story was as far as that goes, and I know there were branching narratives that happened within that too, but that's the only thing that we have outstanding on the live event front that we have yet to talk about. And then there are books and comics, of which there are a fair number of books we haven't talked about, both fiction and reference, and there's a ton of comics that we haven't talked about over the years. So those are the storytelling specific things that we haven't necessarily covered here on the podcast. And then there are other opportunities to do fun things like interviews, for example, or trivia. We can bring trivia back on here, and the occasional news updates when they happen. Although a few months ago on the podcast, I talked about trying to use AI to source and sort through some of that stuff, and boy, was that a miserable failure. But there are other ways that we can pursue these things. So out of everything that I just listed, I would love to hear from you. What would you like to hear talked about on the podcast? So if you're catching this on YouTube, hey, comments are right there. And if you're catching the audio version, then please head over to the blog post for this show's episode. It'll be marked appropriately at sw7x7.com. Please let me know your top 2 or 3. And if there's something that I haven't talked about or an option that I haven't presented that you think would be particularly fascinating to pursue, then please drop that in a comment as well. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.